Should we start with our Father? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Make us worthy, O Lord, to say thankfully, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, now and forever. Amen. Please be seated. I want to welcome Dr. Wenger, a person I know, but of course he's very famous, so I know him, he doesn't know me. Which is today I get the excitement to welcome him in the church. I've known him through the movie Jesus and the Shroud, from I think it's 1999 or 2000 when it came out. And since then I was interested to know about his work and what he's been doing. It's very fascinating to me. I've seen the movies almost more than 50 times with people, different people. Whenever I go somewhere, I show the movie and we talk. And we do more study and we talk. And I thought it should come into a bigger scale of talking, not just one-on-one. So today I welcome him with Chris Berg and Lib Jones. They're helping him today to give us this great presentation, this very exciting presentation about the Shroud of Turin, which is something that I think every Christian and non-Christian should know about. Without further delay, Dr. Wenger, please.
Thank you so much, Father. I didn't realize I had such an advocate here. Yeah, you've been, but we do appreciate that. I appreciate very much the invitation to come over and to share this with you. Is there, Father, I tend to check, is there any teaching or kind of position of the Coptics on the Shroud?
When the Shroud came first in the 80s, and the Coptic Church had many bishops interested, and they went and actually written a book on the Shroud, and we all had it at the time.
Oh.
It was in the 80s. I was in school. I was in the medical school at the time. So I read the book, and I was very excited about it. And I think everyone in the church, almost my generation, knew about it.
Right.
So we have that confirmation of
Right.
the truth of the Shroud.
Okay, well, fine.
As a Christian, almost, we don't base our faith on physical documents.
Sure, right.
We
No.
don't do that. But it's very exciting to be
Right.
involved.
Right. Well, thank you. I'd never heard of the Shroud till 1977. This is in spite of being a student at Duke University for 13 years. I'd never heard about it. Actually, I had to come to Chapel Hill to find out about the Shroud. Although if I'd been a student here, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have heard about it either. Just my wife and I were browsing in the bookstore down on Franklin Street, and I came across this book with this photograph on the cover. The first time I'd ever seen it. And the photography is my main hobby, and I thought, well, that's kind of odd looking, but interesting. So I bought the book just to find out about this. This was 1977. So, that was at to put this in context, the Shroud is mentioned in all four of the Gospels. It doesn't go into great detail. The scripture we base this on primarily is John 20, where the women went to the tomb to finish the burial procedures, and the tomb was open and the body gone, to their alarm, and they ran back and got John and Peter, who were running to the tomb. And the two were running together, and the other disciple ran head faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. And stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but did not go in. Simon Peter therefore also came, following him, and entered the tomb, and he beheld the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up into place by itself. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb entered then also, and he saw, and anyone know the next word? Believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, he must rise from the dead. So something John saw in the tomb, the word saw here, the Greek word eido, means to study very carefully. So John studied something very carefully in the tomb to cause him to become, convinced on the spot. Well, some people say, well, that's because the tomb was empty. Was the tomb empty? No. this previous sentence said the burial cloths were there. What we think is John went over and picked up the burial cloth. This photograph in the corner is a quarter-size photograph of the shroud, so that we think that John went over and picked that up and saw the image of an individual he had just put in the tomb a couple days before. And while John was no scientist, I think he knew perfectly well something highly unusual had happened, and it's sufficient for him to become a believer on the spot. We don't hear anything further in the scripture about the shroud, but it was certainly an instrumental part for a period of time. So I should have heard about the shroud because the first book I started to write at age 15 and a half was entitled "The Scientific Disapproval of God." This rather outrageous piece, I was a bit of a rebel at the time, and but after about a year and a half of struggling here, I couldn't disprove God, so I burned the manuscript and decided if I couldn't beat him, I better join him. So I became a Christian then, although I'd never heard about the shroud. But anyway, that's the sort of our story with it. Well, not quite. Actually, let's see if I can get rid of one thing here. Okay, this is Turin. There's the reason it's called the Shroud of Turin. It's in Turin, Italy. It's the Shroud of Jesus. But that's that there are several copies of this around, and they're often designated by the city they happen to be in. So the shroud has been in Turin for about 450 years, and they're referred to as the Shroud of Turin. The shroud has almost always been the property of the royal house of Italy, and so that was the old royal palace, and they set up the king built a special chapel to house the shroud in here, so it was placed there. This was the scene inside that chapel for over 400 years, as the shroud was wrapped up put in this silver box, which is locked away above that grill work up there. However, back in 1977, an arsonist was trying to get rid of the shroud, which some people have been trying to do for a couple of thousand years, and he set fire to the cathedral there. But fortunately, the shroud was not damaged at that time. This is the cathedral. There was a public viewing in 1978. There's a shroud as ordinary, kept locked up except for once a generation, as brought very briefly for public viewing. By the way, can you hear me back there? I can't tell what the acoustics are like. Okay, if I move away or drop my voice, well, wave your hand if you want to hear me. Okay, so that... Are those marks on there are from the 77 week? Pardon? Those marks on there are from the 77 No, those marks are actually from 1532. Another individual set fire to the chapel that it was in to see if he could get rid of the shroud. The fire melted one corner of the silver box. I'll probably have a photograph on here. I'll detail a little bit better. That is brought out briefly for public viewing about once a generation. It was brought out in 1978, for a public view. It was out about 6 weeks. About 3.5 million people came by in Turin to see the shroud. At that time, they allowed something very unusual. After the public viewing, they allowed a group of about 40 internationally known scientists to come over and examine the shroud. The main question is, how'd that image get on there? And so that the scientists, they took 80 tons of equipment with them, and this is the table that they took along to examine. This is the shroud stretched out on their special examining table, and these are some of the scientists. Interestingly, this is Dr. Tom D. Mahulla, one of the organizers of that, who happens to live in Raleigh. So he's still very interested in the shroud. These are just some of the things that were done. This is X-ray spectrography that was done on the shroud. This is a computer enhancement to show the blood stains more fully. This is the shroud full length. The shroud itself is 14 feet 3 inches long by 3 feet 7 inches wide, which interestingly is exactly 2 by 8 Assyrian cubits, the ancient cloth measure. The shroud is fine linen. This is no ordinary piece of fabric. At the time of Jesus, fine linen was used basically for two purposes. They hangs in the temple in the robe of the high priest. So this is an extraordinary piece of fabric, which is probably part of the reason it's managed to survive all these many years. The gentleman asked a question about these marks here. In that fire in 1532, it melted one corner of the silver box. It dripped molten silver down to the folded shroud and scorched this and burned holes through it. So these triangular things there are patches put on to cover up the holes that were burned in it. That is, you can perhaps see these little marks off the side here. Those are water stains that came from their putting water on it to get the fire put out. But they're prominent, but they don't have anything to do with the original image. You can see them over on the shroud image over here. You can see them quite clearly. The shroud wasn't really appreciated until 1898 when the first photograph was taken of the shroud, at which point the photographer was rather astonished when he developed his negative to see he had a positive image. So he knew immediately there's something very unusual about this image, and that sort of got the interest started. This is the, just a second, I'll move in a little closer here. Okay, that's that the image on the left is the shroud as we look at it. There's that the one on the right over here is the photographic negative of this. And so here we see in very sharp detail the face of an individual has had some pretty terrible things done. We can see these puncture wounds over the head here, blood flow down the forehead, blood flowing through the hair here, blood in the hair down here. We can see that the right eye is swollen shut. There's a depression across the right cheek. The nose is dislocated at this point. There's undoubtedly hit across the face with a heavy stick. Down here we can see part of the beard pulled out as well down here. So this is the individual has been terribly treated and beaten here. This is just the data on the shroud. We're just going to briefly introduce you to the shroud if you're not very familiar with it and some of the things we find on it. This area, we're looking at the back of the head and the shoulders here. And again, we can see about 40 puncture wounds over the scalp here. We can see an unbraided ponytail, a hairstyle characteristic of Jewish males back in Jesus' time. A little better seen here, we can see the bruises across the shoulders. As unlike most artistic depictions which show Jesus carrying the whole cross, what the Romans would do, they would just tie the cross beam across the individual shoulders, and as they carried that out to the place of crucifixion, where they were fastened to the cross beam, which is then hoisted up on top of the upright, which is already in place. And all these little marks down here are the marks of the scourge. This shows the arms pulled down across the abdomen here. And again, unlike most artistic depictions which show the nail wound through the palm of the hand, this shows that the nail was put through the wrist. The Romans, who did thousands of crucifixions, knew that the tissue in the hand is too weak to hold the person up on the cross, so they knew you either had to nail the individual through the wrist or through the forearm to keep them up there. Liv, you're keeping time on me. Tell me about it. Oh. Okay. Chris, you got to watch? Oh, okay. No, I was just checking. Keep time on me here. I'm sorry, my wife couldn't come over tonight. She ordinarily keeps time on me. I tend to, this is kind of interesting. I tend to ramble sometimes, and we don't want to impose on you too much this evening. This shows the bottom of the feet. We can actually tell that the body is in what we call cadaveric spasm, or this is a type of rigor mortis that occurs almost instantaneously, and somebody's been traumatized just before death. And so that we can see that the body is in this spasm. We're looking at the bottom of the feet here. The right foot was put against the upright. Can't see it too well here, but there's a nail wound right through through there. This is the heel of the left foot, which was put on top of the right foot here. This shows the fine detail we see on this shroud. We can actually tell the type of scourge that was used. This is called the flagellatum, or the terrible scourge. And this is the this Roman whip had straps on it here with metal dumbbells on the end of it that had little barbs on. So every time the individual was hit, it'd drive the barbs in. When they pulled it back, it'd tear out little bits of the flesh here. So we can see the individual was hit at least 125 times, front and back, with these terrible Roman scourges. This basically turned him into a bloody mass, which of course, a pilot was planning on doing, hoping that would, satisfy the crowd and could avoid the crucifixion. But it didn't, obviously. This was obviously done by professionals because they carefully avoided hitting him over the heart, which could have killed him on the spot. So they didn't want to kill him; they just wanted to macerate him. This shows that an oval area right here. This is the actual right side of the chest. That's the spear wound there, and this is blood. The dark material, blood flowing from that. The light material is human serum albumin. This was fluid around the lung from all the beating and so forth, caused the fluid to accumulate around the lung. Well, the Romans were very strict. That is that the rule was if they ever let a crucifixion victim get away alive, the executioners would be crucified. So, although Jesus was obviously already dead, in order to make sure he was dead before they had released the body, they speared him through the heart, which, if he weren't dead, would kill him within 13 seconds or so. This is a crucifix made from information on the shroud. Again, showing the position on the cross, the pattern distribution of the scourge marks here, and indicating probably a couple of modes of death. Part of this was blood loss. I mean, with all this beating, severe blood loss, and of course the terrible trauma from all the beating. But also, when suspended by the arms this way, it causes the rib cage to expand, and you can't get your breath out. So, in order to breathe, the individual has to push up on the nail through the feet. Well, with all that pain so far, they soon slump down. And so this is probably the worst form of execution ever devised. This was sort of a slow writhing between agonizing pain and suffocation until the individual just fainted away and died. Or when it got time for the executioner to go home, they would break the lower legs so the individual could no longer push himself up and he'd suffocate in 12 or 15 minutes. The shroud is not quite a typical burial cloth. The Jews used shrouds, but this we see here was stretched out here. The body put on it. There's a lot of other things that put inside, and then the shroud was folded over the top like this. That is, ordinarily they would put bands around just to kind of tighten it up a little bit, as they did not mummy wrap the bodies. They would just put them in the shroud, and then they would tie bands around the knees and the trunk and the neck to hold the shroud in place. But the women were planning on coming back to finish up the burial procedures, and so they left it loose. This is the image that actually got the scientific studies started on the shroud. This was done by two astrophysicists who were plotting the lunar landing sites. They had a computer device that would convert the density of image from the space satellites into height. And just out of curiosity, one of them put a photograph of the shroud face in their computer device and got a perfect three-dimensional image of it. They knew immediately this is no ordinary image, because no ordinary photograph or painting will do that. That is that's what got the scientists their beginning interest, which is still going on, I might say that is that the scientists, they did over 1,000 tests on the shroud, took 32,000 photographs of it. So the shroud by this time is the most intensely studied single object in existence. But still, they very quickly discovered there's no dye, pigment, stain, anything of the sort on it, which would indicate that this was an artistic production of any type. But they couldn't explain how it got on there. They could describe it, but they couldn't explain it. Well, a lot of information was coming out in 1978 about the shroud, and we were kind of casually interested in that. But idea was coming out that this is a medieval artistic production of some sort, and obviously, a fake. But anyway, in 1979, one of my colleagues, I was on the faculty at Duke, but one of my colleagues there was doing research on intertestamental literature. And so he was doing his studies at St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai in the Sinai Desert. And while he was reading the literature, the St. Catherine's, which happens to be an intact 6th century church, is a treasure house of early icons and manuscripts. And while he was reading the manuscripts, one of the priests came and showed him some of their icons, including this one. This is called Christ Pantocrator, which is their prize icon. It's so striking that my friend that I told our casual interest in the Shroud about asked the monk where that came from. The monk said, "Well, that's painted from the Shroud of Turin." Well, that clicked in my friend's mind, so I came back with the photograph of the icon and this story, which immediately interested my wife and myself, because this icon was painted about 550 A.D. And so if the monk's story was correct, obviously the shroud had to be around in the 6th century if somebody was going to go painting it. So we tried to figure out some way of determining whether the monk's story was correct or not. This is one of the early piece of research I did. I went to literature trying to find out how you do image comparison. I couldn't find anything that was too helpful. So this is early on. I just lined up the photograph of the icon along beside those of the shroud and noted some others had fairly close resemblance between these two. But still, the scientists like data and not just impressions here. This was a little later study. This is the Byzantine coin. That's the first coin with a depiction of Jesus on it. This is struck in Constantinople in 692. And I'd seen a photograph of the coin, and I thought, well, that might be of interest to us. So I finally was able to get one of these coins, and then I photographed the coin, split the image. So this is the coin, this is the shroud face over here, and when I lined those up, began to notice all sorts of things began to line up. And I thought, this began to look interesting here. Well, it finally occurred to me to project one image on top of the other one. And so that this area right here, that's the eye area of the coin we just saw, which I projected directly on top of the shroud image, and saw all sorts of things begin to line up. So I thought, well, maybe this is going to be the way we could study this accurately. There's a problem. Now, that's when you project two images on top of each other, it sort of makes a mess. So the problem is, how can you make distinguishable images out of two photographs on top of each other? So we developed a technique we call the polarized image overlay technique. That is, we're projecting the two images directly on top of each other through polarizing filters here, and then to view this, you view it through a third polarizing filter, and you can shift back and forth from one image to the other very exactingly. So you can do very exacting comparisons between these images. I'd like for people to do this, but it takes a while to get this set up, and we have a lot of things to show you tonight, so I'm just going to show you videos of some of this rather than let you do it yourself, which we really like for people to do. Okay. This is the coin image here with the shroud face of Jesus, or the face of Jesus on the coin. This is the shroud, and we're shifting back and forth from one image to the other here. And what we do is we pick out particular features. What we're looking at, say up here, these curls in the forehead here, very characteristic Byzantine depiction of Jesus. We rotate it to the shroud. You can see that matches up. We're kind of moving a little fast here. I'm afraid you're going to have to take my word for some of this, but these tiny little marks down here are visible on the shroud, including the fold across the neck and so forth. So, these are, we could determine what we call the points of congruence. That is, this is where there is a similar image on the two images we're comparing. So, that when they match up very closely, we call that a point of congruence. And so here we actually, my wife is my good wife of 58 years. She's also my co-researcher, co-editor, co-author, and she ordinarily keeps time on me that Chris will do here. But these are the points of congruence that we tabulate over here. And so that these match up between these two. Here we found 145 points of congruence between the coin image and the shroud image. Well, in a court of law, it takes only 45 to 60 points of congruence to determine the same face. And so I think we have a case here. We could take to court and then win the case that indeed this coin is a highly accurate depiction of the face on the Shroud of Turin. I don't know how we would do in California or maybe Massachusetts, but I think most other places we could win our case. Now this is that was from the coin. We did the same thing on the pantocrator the icon here, and these are the points of congruence, as we got 170 here, although we've determined about 250 points of congruence between this icon and the shroud, indicating that the only way you could ever get this detail on there is for a highly skilled artist to be making the facial image directly from looking at the shroud and producing it as accurately as they could. Of course, he uses some, the image on the shroud is kind of a faint, sort of a ghost-like image, and you have to make it. The artist has to make it presentable or intelligible to the onlooker here. But this shows that the monk's story was absolutely correct here. So that gets the shroud back into the 6th and 7th century. Well, when they did the three-dimensional imaging on the shroud face, they noticed these button-like things over the eyes. Some speculated those might be coins, and so there were 7 investigators were looking into this. They speculated since those might be coins, they wanted to look at that very closely. There were 7 investigators, I think. 6 of them were physicists, and one was Father Frank Files, who was a professor of theology at Loyola University up in Chicago. Well, he was one of the early shroud researchers. He is also a photographer. He also had access to the photographs that were taken in 1931 of the shroud, which are early, but they have incredible detail on them. This is actually our son-in-law Peter here. That a lot of our research has been sort of a family project. This is our son-in-law playing dead here, and I put putty across his face so to mimic the injuries. I'm sorry we can't see it; it's a little too light here. But anyway, Mary put one of her scarves across here, which would show the shroud would virtually hit the coin in the right eye. And so the scientists did discover that the density of image on the shroud is directly proportional to the distance between the body and the shroud. That's part of the thing that gives it the particular features to it. But anyway, there's that the Dr. Files was looking at he was given this coin. There's that Father Files was. It said that when he was looking at this, we're nose on nose with the shroud here. This is nose, this is the right eye area here, left eye area here. Well, Dr. Files says he made an enlargement of the shroud, and he thought he noticed something like a shepherd's crook running up there, and he thought he saw little letters, U-C-A-I up there. Well, he was publicly accused of hallucinating, but he was a very, very strong-minded individual and had good material. And so that since he was one of the researchers, the coin expert working with the group said, well, he knew a coin that had this thing like a shepherd's crook on it as the major pattern. And, well, that happens to be the lepton or the pruta or the widow's mite struck by one Pontius Pilate. This is the only coin ever struck that has this as the major feature on it. So the coin expert happened to have a few of these, so I passed them around to the people. Dr. Files, being the lone theologian, got the crummiest coin, but that was fortunate because people finally began to say, well, maybe there are little letters on there, but still Dr. Files had to be wrong because while those are, this is the coin that he was given. While this is a Jewish coin struck in a Roman province, it's written in Greek. And so that what Dr. Files' coin shows, as the coins of the time, this is the inscription on it. This is a T tipped on its side, T-I-O-U, abbreviation for Tiberius. It was to honor Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor. And up here, there should be a K. Caesar in Greek is spelled with a K, but here, as Dr. Faust has speculated, there's a C. Well, he was rather astonished and pleased to find on the coin he's given that there's a letter C. This is the first known of this misspelling that was ever noted. So what we're doing here, we're doing an overlay of the coin and of the image over the right eye. See if we can get it go again here. Well, let's see where. Okay. Well, if you look closely, I'm sorry, this kind of run by, but we can see the letter C, which we see on the shroud, exactly sits on top of the C on the coin, as do the other letters, the U, C. Here's the tail of the upsilon we can see. The A up here, there's a dye defect. This circular part right here is a dye defect in the coin, and it's visible on the shroud. So this shows, of all things, the coin that was given to Dr. Files is a die made. It's not the same coin, but it's struck from the same die as the coin that formed the image over the right eye. So this is important because this was just the penny of the time and would never circulate outside of Israel. And Dr. Files, we contacted him and said, well, look, we've developed a technique by which we can determine whether your observations are correct or not. Well, he was glad to find somebody to take him seriously, so he sent his photographs down, and we did this work on it, show that indeed he had been given a coin that was, a priceless coin here, and so that actually, he came down and gave a lecture with me over at Duke, and he brought his coin with him. I photographed the backside of it, which showed this coin was struck in the 16th year of the reign of Tiberius, which happens to be 29 A.D. So, the question is, how old is the shroud? Well, of all things, here we have, the image of a Jewish coin struck in 29 D over the right eye. Pardon? Right. Well, this is that there's also a Jewish Pontius Pilate lepton over the left eye, also struck only in 29 A.D. So of all things, we've got a coin over each eye, both of them struck in Israel in 29 A.D. So that's pretty hard evidence. This is the green mark here. That's the image on the shroud. It's been computer enhanced to get rid of the weave pattern, but here we can see the letters that are on the shroud. This is the outline of Dr. Files' coin. And what my wife and I would do, we sit down and we would we do all of our work together, so that a lot of people say, well, you're just seeing faces in the clouds and this sort of thing. Well, we rely on our at least both of us seeing the faces in the cloud before we would publicize it. But here, all the markings on the shroud outlined in red are points of congruence. So we've actually got about 211 points of congruence between that coin and the shroud. It's not the same coin, and the blue marks don't match up, but we don't expect a perfect match here anyway, but we've only got 86 points that don't match up with that. Well, that's a characteristic of what's called electrostatic or coronal discharge, which is a type of radiation. And so most people don't know what coronal discharge is. This is an image of coronal discharge inside of a light bulb. These are electron streamers that come off the irregular surface and high points of the object. And we felt that was the case. I worked with a German physicist who did some imaging using coronal discharge. I sent him a coin similar to the one over the right eye, and very promptly sent back an image made on linen from that coin, which has many resemblances to the image on the shroud. Well, but back in 78 when they did the study, they talked about doing a carbon dating on the shroud then. But at that time, it would take about a handkerchief-sized piece of fabric to do a carbon dating, and they weren't about to chop a great big hole in the shroud to do that. But within a few years, the technique improved, And so they could get a postage stamp size specimen, do a carbon dating. So in 1986, a group of 24 carbon dating experts met in Turin to set up the procedure or the protocol for doing the carbon dating. However, they said take 7 specimens, 7 places, use 7 labs, 2 techniques, study the material very carefully before they test it, which is a pretty good scientific setup. However, for reasons that were not clear and suspicious to a number of us, shortly before they took the specimen in 1988, the scientific advisor for the then Cardinal of Turin, the custodian of the shroud, said we're going to throw out the entire protocol. We'll throw out 4 of the labs, 2 of the techniques. We'll take 1 specimen, and I'll tell you where we're going to take it from. Well, you don't do scientific investigation that way, but that's what they did. Thank you. So anyway, this is the result of the carbon dating that they did in 88. And here we see the press conference announcing the carbon dating on the shroud. Anyone remember hearing about the carbon dating on the shroud? Okay. Well, I mean, this was on the front page of virtually every newspaper around the world, that they showed the result of the carbon dating, which showed between 1260 and 1390. And, so that this proved that the shroud was a fake. Well, if you haven't noticed it, the media is generally anti-Christian, and from long experience that my wife and have had, the media is strongly anti-shroud. And so they were delighted to be able to get rid of this this shroud, since it's supposedly medieval fake, and they didn't have to bother with it anymore. Well, we knew better than that, but anyway, this was the scientific study here, supposedly showing the carbon data of the shroud. Well, we knew better than that, so we studied this rather extensively. This is where they took the single sample for the carbon dating in 1988. They were supposed to take 7 samples from 7 places. They took 1 sample from 1 place they'd been told to stay away from because that corner was abnormal. But anyway, that's where they took the specimens from. So 3 labs did the same test on the same specimen. That's not good scientists, in case some of you are scientists. You don't do that sort of thing, but they did it. This shows, I got videos of them taking the sample in 1988, and so that this shows the sample, which is cut from 1 corner. There's a seam that runs the full length of the shroud. There were patches put on the shroud to repair the fire of 1532, and so that this seam runs down there. And here we see the single sample cut loose. This seam, which was put in the 16th century, is running up the sample. And here, where the sample has just come loose, we can see, abnormal, dense threads extending out from the seam into the fabric. Well, that's what they did the test on. Well, as soon as my wife was very good with fabrics, saw this, she said, "That's been either rewoven or repaired." Well, I quite agreed with her, but this showed, of all things, they took the single piece of fabric which had been rewoven, or partially rewoven in the 16th century. So, we have good evidence that the carbon dating was either the most bungled test, or as some of us suspect, may have been deliberately manipulated to give the wrong date to the shroud. Since not everybody, is enthusiastic about having the real shroud of Jesus showing his resurrection around. But anyway, that was that situation. Let's see, my time is running a little tight here. I want to take about a 10-minute break for you to kind of look at some of the things around here, and then we'll go into a different aspect here. I'll just show this fairly quickly. This is the photograph of what's called the Siderium of Oviedo. That is in the Gospel I read. I mentioned the face cloth. The Siderium is the face cloth, which followed a very different course than the shroud. We trace the shroud which was taken out of Jerusalem in 30 A.D. The Siderium, the face cloth, stayed in Jerusalem till 614, which case the Persians were about to invade Jerusalem. Surprise, surprise, here. And so they got the Christian relics out of Jerusalem and sent them to Alexandria, Egypt. first, but as the Moors moved up through Egypt, they moved the relics across first to Cartagena, Spain, and as the Moors invaded Spain, they moved them up to Cartagena, and finally they moved them up to Oviedo, Spain, which was the only part of Spain that wasn't overrun by the Moors. So the Sudarium has been in the same place in Oviedo, Spain, since the 8th century. Been under constant observation in the same place. Well, we got interested in that since as we developed this overlay technique, and the Sudarium has only blood stains on it. It has no image on it. But this is just an overlay of the blood stains on the shroud with the Sudarium, and here we can pick out quickly here. We can see that they match up remarkably well here. You can actually see the outline of the mustache, the outline of the nose, the blood over here. Now this is the backside when it's tucked around the backside of the head here, and here if you follow the blood stains across, see blood stain, blood stain, blood stain, blood stain, blood stain, blood stain, blood stain. There are about 120 blood stains that match up between the Sudarium of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin, showing that both these claws were in touch with the same individual, and these are both the traditional burial claws of Jesus. So of all things, we have at least 2 of the burial claws in existence. And this is actually the Sudarium in Spain. My wife and I were members of the Spanish Shroud group, and they invited us over. They were going to do some testing on the Sudarium, and they invited us over for that. And so this is actually the Sudarium in Spain, so you can get an idea of the size of it. It's enough to wrap around the face. The reason for that, by Jewish custom, that the face of the deceased was disfigured. It was covered up with a cloth as a mark of respect until they got the body buried. But also, by Jewish custom, anything that was in touch with the body at the time of death or had the lifeblood on it was buried with the body. And so the Sudarium actually have blood all over it, but they would have to take that off because 2 things were always done at the time of death for a Jew. They would close the eyes and they'd tie the chin shut. So the chin band is on the shroud. We can see where the image of that is. But they would have to take the face cloth off. But since it's bloody, they fold it up and put it in the tomb beside the shroud. Okay. What we're looking at here. Let's see. Give a little quick test to a few of you. We're very fortunate in having about 35 extremely high-grade photographs of the shroud. This is one of our photographs. We've had these, and I've spent thousands of hours over the past 34 years. And this is just back in, can you hear me back there? Okay. In 1983, said he saw flower images around the face. But I was looking, I didn't see them, so I told him, look, we're in enough trouble with those coins over the eyes, let's skip that. But anyway, a couple of years later, I was up close trying to identify what these there's some funny marks on here. I was trying to identify what they are. And I thought I saw little faces out of the corner of my eye. I thought, oh boy, I've been staying up too late at night. Well, I was. While I was working, I had to do my shroud research between 1 and 4 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, can you see a pattern there? What does it look like?
Looks like a flower.
Oh, what flower? Have you ever seen anything like that? Oh, she gets a prize, the first guess here. That's the crown daisy or the chrysanthemum coronarium. Yeah, so are you a botanist? Okay, well, fine. Well, I don't have time to pass this all the way around, but this will be up here. And when I once saw what the images look like, although I've been, it took me 5 years to find that, and you found it in 5 seconds here. Where were you when I was trying to find it? But anyway, when I saw what they looked like, I've been looking around, and there are all sorts of very interesting images all over the shroud here. Well, I'm trained in lots of fields, but botany is not one of them. So I got the 8-volume botany books of Israel, and over these are easier to see if you once put an overlay down. I can't quite get it down, but anyway, when you once finally spot them, then they're relatively easy to see. But anyway, I spent 4 years matching up the images on the shroud with those in the botany books, and so that at the end of that time, I tentatively identified 28 varieties of flowers and thorns on the shroud. We thought this was fairly interesting since all of these grow in Israel. The common blooming time is March and April. And also, there's another scientist back in '78 had taken sticky tapes off the shroud to examine microscopically for pollen grains. And he had identified the pollen grains of 57 plants, and of the 28 that we identified, he had identified the pollen grains already quite independently of 23 of these. So anyway, we thought that was pretty interesting. And so we tried to get this into the media. But this was 1989, and guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. That's that the shroud had been proved to be a fake the year before, and so nobody's going to pay attention to this guy down at Duke trying to tell people that they're Jewish flowers on this fake shroud at Turin. So anyway, that's, we couldn't do anything with that, so we just kind of backburned it. But in 1995, my wife and I were members of the Spanish Shroud group who took a tour to Israel and invited us along, on the tour. I'd heard of Professor Avinoam Danin. He's a professor of botany at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's the world's authority on the flowers of the Middle East. So I just called him up and said, look, I do research on the shroud, and I found some images I'd like to show you. Well, he's a secular Jew, and he has no stock in the shroud, but he's a good scientist. He'd look at anything once. So anyway, I took this photograph and some of our others out, and we went out to his home in Jerusalem. After getting acquainted, I just handed this to him. Not the overlays. I didn't tell him anything that I saw. I just handed this to him, and I never will forget this. He just picked it up and looked up and down for about 10 seconds and said, "Those are the flowers of Jerusalem." That's what I thought, but it's nice having the world's authority on the flowers of Jerusalem agree with us. So, he immediately knew this was something highly unusual. So, he's been much involved. Subsequently, he's been over to visit us in Durham on 8 different occasions. He's began giving lectures to his botany classes at Hebrew University in Jerusalem on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin, which, needless to say, got the attention of the media and the administration there. But they said, well, he's the authority. He can speak for himself. But anyway, he's...
So this is the back of his head?
No, this is the face. Yes. This is the top of the head. This is the back of the neck down there. So these were put all they're images of thousands of flowers on there. Most of them are wrinkled up and this sort of thing. Can't identify, but a number of them. He's come over to examine these photographs and others, and he's seen the shroud, from 2 feet away also. So he's identified over 30 different flowers on this, and he said there's no doubt that the shroud originated in Jerusalem and originated in either the month of April or March or April. April or May, and he also found this particular flower down here, which is the Caparis plant. It's a very peculiar plant. It begins opening, the bud starts opening in the morning. It opens gradually during the day. It's fully open just before sundown. But if you're a botanist, you can tell time of day from the degree of opening of the flower. And he said that flower is picked between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we got some, pretty hard botanical evidence, here. Okay, well. Well, this is just to show, some of these, the outlines of the flowers here. This is where the flower is, where just pointing out, and this good lady on the front row identified as a daisy. This is the outline of some of the outline overlay of some of these. These are close-up of it. This is the image on the shroud. This is the image from the botany book here. These are others that we can see. The fine detail. We can see the petals, the sepals of the plant clearly identified on the shroud here. I won't have time to do the overlay here. These little berries up here. This is called Pistachio lentiscus. This is one of the burial spices. part of the burial spices were dried plants. And so here, this is one of the burial spices that was put on it. And we can see that they're on. Here's a closer up. Maybe some in the back row can see a little bit better. Sorry. Here's the image on the shroud. This is a coronal imaging off of chrysanthemum, off of daisy here. And, perhaps you can begin to see the pattern up there. The images on the shroud are faint. They're fragmentary, and they're reversed. They're positive and negative are reversed. Also, the right and left are reversed, so it gets kind of confusing, here to describe all of these. This was the late Dr. Max Fry in 1978. He was a Swiss botanist and criminalist as he gathered material for forensic cases. And he got permission to take these sticky tapes off the shroud. I was mentioning he identified the pollen grains. But this is Dr. Fry taking one of the sticky tapes off the shroud in 1978. He died in 1983 before he could do very much with his, with the material he gathered in 1978. Died in 83, and his wife was no botanist. Wanted something done with all this, huge collection of material that he had gotten related to this. So when we heard in 1988 whether they're going to take the specimen for the carbon dating from, we knew we were going to be in trouble. And so that we had been in touch with Mrs. Fry. This is Dr. Fry's widow here and one of their sons. She wanted something done with her husband's work. So we had been in touch with him, and so several of us kind of gathered together quickly, went over to Switzerland and picked up Dr. Fry's entire collection. So, this is when we were in Switzerland picking up the collection. These are the tapes from it. I mean, they just look like Scotch tape stuck on a microscopic slide, which is, but what's on those tapes is what's important. These are some of the micro photographs from those tapes. This is a pollen grain here. These are the pollen grains, and those of you who are allergic to some of these pollens around, these are the sorts of things that irritate your nose. These are some of the various pollen grains here. These are fragments of flowers here. This is through a peculiar set of circumstances, we acquired custody of Dr. Fry's collection. And so here is one of our colleagues here, who's a microscopist. This is Professor Danin, sitting in our basement, going through the various material we got from the Fry collection here. This shows Professor Danin outlining the flowers on the shroud. He invited one of his colleagues, this is Dr. Uri Baruch, who's a pollenologist, as he specialized in pollen identification. So he came over to re-examine these slides and, to determine the various pollen grains that were found on the slides. This just shows the distribution of the plants on the shroud. Again, Professor Danin, who knows the distribution of all the plants out there, could say with certainty that the only place you could find all these flowers in one place was in Jerusalem, or the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem.
What's the difference between the hatch mark and the solid?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Can you go back one slide?
Right.
Another slide.
Well, let's see, I've got, okay, fine, thank you. Okay.
What's the difference between the hatch mark and the dark area?
I'm sorry?
What's the difference between the hatch mark and the dark area?
Oh, okay. Those are distributions of various of the plants and the pollen distribution. So, some of them grow. They would grow only in the immediate vicinity of Jerusalem and the desert close by. Others had much wider distribution. So that just shows the distribution of various plants. This is in 2000. They had a private showing, private meeting of 37 of the researchers in Turin, and so Professor Dineen and I were invited over there, and so that they brought the shroud out, no glass, no anything. This is the Shroud of Turin right here, and we had this opportunity to examine it for 3 hours. This is Professor Dineen pointing to one of the images down here. This is one of a thorn that you may not recognize. We won't have time to go into detail on that. There are images of all kinds of things on the shroud, including all of the implements of the crucifixion, which were put inside the shroud. They're all imaged. What we're looking at here, we have some posters out which will show this, is an outline of one of the crucifixion nails. This is the image, anyway, it's right here. This is an outline of what's right here. This is the image of the spear that put the wound in the side. This is just we put posters up here. We'll take a break here in just a couple of minutes and go around and look at some of these things yourself. Also, people say, well, the Romans crucified lots of people. This could be the image of anybody. Well, not quite. I mean, the shroud is totally unique. There's nothing that remotely resembles the shroud in existence. But among the various images, there happens to be this image of this object on the right shoulder, which is a crown of thorns. There's no use of crown of thorns in history prior to that of Jesus. So of all things, here we have the image of a crown of thorns. The crown was put in the shroud and was imaged along with the body. So there's no doubt about who this is. This is a closer up of the same area here, and this is a 3D image. This just shows how we feel that the body was interred. As the body was put on the shroud, and then there are bundles of flowers, bouquets, and all the instruments were put, some on the body, most of them down beside the body. The full length of the shroud was folded over, and then when the image was formed, everything was imaged. These are just the implements of the crucifixion from early artwork. So that this just shows the image on the shroud is obviously much clearer than it is now. The image has been fading, or actually the shroud has been turning yellow, which is sort of swallowing up the image. Of course, rolling and unrolling it, they do cracks the image off too. So obviously the image is much clearer because they accurately depict all these images on the shroud in the early centuries. Let's see, we'll stop with this one. These are the hands folded across the shroud. Now, what we're going to do here, this is an optical technique called photo relief. What we're going to do is move these out of alignment here and just watch and see what you see. As when I move these up like this, you see we get a three-dimensional image. And as soon as I did that, I said, oh boy, there are the bones. But, those that I'm a psychiatrist. I'm trained in general surgery, so I've had a lot of experience looking at x-rays. And so when I saw that, I said, let's see if I can move on to, I think I overshot here. This is the face on the shroud. This is just the same technique here. When we use this technique, it's a legitimate technique of shifting the positive and negative images out of alignment. We get this three-dimensional image. As soon as I did that, we begin to see a rather striking image up here. Let's see if we're work with this one. Okay, what we're doing the overlay of the face on the shroud with a X-ray of a skull from a textbook. And if we shift up here, you can see that we're seeing the orbits and margins of the orbits here. We see the nasal bone in here. We can see the jawbone down here. We have a dentist in the group. A dentist here. Well, anyway, here we got the the image of 24 teeth, roots and all, visible on the shroud. So this is the first dental X-ray taken over 2,000 years ago. Again, showing that the shroud image is a complex radiation image here. Let's see. Well, this just my wife kind of looking in awe. Is even though we've been looking at this for 34 years, it's still an awesome sight to see the shroud. Well, let's take a 7-minute break here to stretch your legs, and you can look at some of the materials around here. That is that there's some 3D photographs up here. You need red-blue glasses here, but you might find that of interest. There's some photographs and materials back there. The books are not giveaway, but there are materials out there. You can take a copy of that if you'd like. Well, they've done several DNA testing. However, none of them have been authorized. So they're just kind of, random things that people say, well, this is blood from it, and they do a DNA test. Well, I mean, there was all kind of results, including when the testing said, well, this is this female DNA. Well, I mean, this is nonsense. But anyway, it's never been officially done, and I'm not particularly in favor of it because there's so little material on there, it's hard to get an accurate, testing. Right. Well, I'm not familiar with that, and actually, pardon?
I'm a scientist.
Oh, okay.
Biomedical scientist.
Oh.
Scientist.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, what we're trying to do is to get do mitochondrial DNA testing. Oh, okay. Well, bless your heart. Thank you. So, that is the thing. Mitochondrial DNA.
Yeah.
I took the blood specimen from the Bavarian. They're in the Institute of Justice in Madrid, Spain.
Can I ask you a favor, please? Please don't.
Dr. Wayne? What's I want to do? You know the
2025. It's ordinarily brought out just once a generation, and it was out in 210. I mean, you know, you know, but yeah. So we hope that they'll get it out before then. Actually, the last act of Pope Benedict, the last act of his office was to authorize a video presentation of the Shroud from Turin, an hour-long presentation to be distributed worldwide. And interestingly, when he ordered that on Holy Saturday to be made and presented then. Well, the new Pope, Pope Francis, went up and narrated part of the presentation on the Shroud. So we're hoping maybe he might be a little more open to getting the Shroud out before 2025.
Yeah, that would be good to see.
Yeah, right. So.
What's the motivation for them not allowing to do proper carbon testing? What would be the motivation to take care of it?
The Cardinal of Turin, at the time that the Shroud was there, didn't think it was authentic, and neither did his scientific advisor. And part of the Pope's Curia didn't believe it was authentic either. And you know, it's highly controversial. And they think, well, you know, this was perhaps a good opportunity to, you know, to kind of get rid of people speculating that this might be authentic. As I say, the Shroud is good news for a lot of people. It's bad news for some.
Yeah, that's true.
Some is bad news for, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a second here, please. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming here with us today.
Well,
It's really a pleasure to have you.
Well, fine. Well, glad for the opportunity. Maybe we have such a fine group of enthusiastic folks here.
You bless our community. Thank you.
We probably look at some of these things, but we're glad for the opportunity for you to see some of these things.
Yeah, I haven't seen a special. I think it's chapter 4. Shroud. It's close to live. It's not probably not
Okay, we'll get on. Okay, well, I'll just start off on the Pantocrator icon again, since that's what got us started in our serious shroud work here, and we feel that among the thousands of images that we've studied, as my wife and I have done research on the early images dating from the 1st century on, to see what impact the shroud had on depictions of Jesus. So this, among all the hundreds of images that we've examined, this is the most accurate to the shroud. So, this was a fortunate one to start with. Okay, well, this is something, there'll be just a bit of repetition as we use our overlay technique for examining most of our images here. This is the Pantocrator icon. Let's see. Okay, well, we've done this before, but you can see the tip of the nose, the pattern of the eye. We can see a little tear trickling down of what the eye on the right here. Also, these are all points of congruence with the shroud. And as we go out into the out here, you can see the little dots here. These match up with the flower images on the shroud. So these are the points of congruence. As I say, we've got over 250. We didn't bother putting them on since, they'd be sort of gilding the lily, since it takes only 45 to 60 points of congruence to determine the same face legally. That's, if you're trying to get on airplanes these days, they very likely do a facial profile on you. They use the same sort of technique, and if you only need 60 points of congruence matching up with what's in the FBI files, you're off to the jailhouse. These are just some of the early icons that we studied. This is called Christ Helios. This is probably a 2nd century icon. These I just have to kind of run through quickly here. These a lot of these have interesting histories to them. These are some of the early depictions of Jesus. In the early centuries, they had two different ideas what Jesus looked like. Part of the icons or images show a boy, probably modeled on Dionysus. And so this is one of the early ones. This is on the sarcophagus in Rome, probably 2nd or 3rd century. This is another sarcophagus in Rome, which obviously has a markedly different facial image to it. As we determined that from examining these, that probably, I didn't have time to go into a lot of the interesting history. The shroud was sent up to King Abgar V in the city of Edessa. This is about 400 miles north of Jerusalem in 30 A.D. As the disciples, of course, knew they had to get the shroud out of Jerusalem, since if either the Roman authorities, the Jewish authorities got it, they would immediately destroy it. Since this is inspiring all these Christians around saying Jesus resurrected, and all kinds of things were getting kind of stirred up. So they had to get it out of Jerusalem. They sent it up to King Abgar, who had contracted leprosy. And he had, in some of the Orthodox churches, I don't know about the Coptic, they have copies of reputed correspondence between Abgar inviting Jesus to come up and heal him, and a letter from Jesus back to Abgar saying he had to finish his work in Israel, but he'd send one of his disciples up. That is historically, Thaddeus was probably Jewish zealot, went up, carried this image up to Abgar, which resulted in Abgar being miraculously cured of his leprosy. Abgar breaking up the city goddess, making a copy of the face, the shroud, which had been folded up in 8 thickness, so only the face showed, is known as the Mandilion. So in the early centuries, probably up to about 1100, they only knew they had the face image, not the full shroud. But anyway, Abgar made a copy of this face on the shroud, mounted up above the main city gate, said with the inscription of it, Christ the God, he who trusts in him will not be disappointed. And so all the traders and caravanners and tourists and everybody that came into Edessa, which is a walled city, had to stop and venerate at this image of Jesus up over the main city gate. Well, of course, that spread very quickly. So We knew that, and probably Thomas may have carried some of a copy of the shroud face with him when he went off to the Far East, since almost certainly copy books were made, and where the artists would copy the original, and they would send these to various centers off as far as India to underground Rome, so the artists would have some idea what Jesus looked like. Since the iconographers in the Middle East, I suppose this, well, true of them generally, is that they, when they're making an image of Jesus, they just don't casually whip up an idea of what Jesus looked like, no more than casually rewrite the scriptures. Because since they had the image they considered to be authentic, it was called the archepetos, or image not made with hands, they used that as the model. Obviously that was the facial image on the shroud. But anyway, so some artists knew what he looked like, and some didn't. And so there's a lot of variation in that. These are just catacomb depictions of Jesus. Sharpen that up a bit. Well, these are on some of the posters. This just indicates somewhat different ideas of what Jesus looked like in the catacombs. This is from the catacomb of Calixtus here, which is an interesting one. This is one of the early depictions of Jesus here. This is the Pope Urban II here. Kind of looking at the image of Jesus. Pope Urban reigned between, 235 and 255, I think. So we're not sure when this image was done, which I've seen. It's still, visible in the Catacomb of Calixtus, and it, it's obviously got a number of features with the shroud. Let's see. Well. Okay, well, here we go. Okay, well, so that, I'm sorry, we just have to do this quickly. You see the box in the forehead up here. You see the marks across the cheek over here. See the line down here across the neck. These are all points of congruence between that image in the Roman catacombs and the shroud, probably 3rd century. These are the depictions of Jesus, in Rome. I'm just going to have to run through these where we don't have time to look at all of these. So part of these were frontal images, as we're looking straight ahead. Part of them were either right or left partial rotation. That is that this is I'll just move ahead on this. You can see that there are a number of similarities here, even though it's a slightly rotated image. That is that this is an important image. That is that all the divinities and royalties and so forth ordinarily were depicted in profile. And just all of a sudden, this is Zeus Kyrios, an image here. All of a sudden, he's looking, instead of sideways, he's looking what called frontality here. So, he's looking straight ahead, at the onlooker here. This is the first image of this type. That's, rarely previously there'd be one of the depicted people looking forward, but ordinary profile was the strict procedure. But all of a sudden here is this image with full frontality. Well, this image happens to be self-dated. Actually, I've seen it. This is in the up in the Art Museum of Yale University. But there's at the this profile is self-dated to 31 AD. Well, this is just a close-up of that. This is just an overlay, again, showing, the marked similarity between that image of Zeus Kyrios from 31 AD and the shroud face. This is called Aflad. This is from 54 AD. And, again, when we do overlay of the shroud, we see many of the same characteristics. The wide staring eyes with often being one of the pupils off center, the mustache, the beard, often with the split in the beard down here. So you see on the shroud. This is the earliest depiction of Buddha. Buddha was never depicted in human form. There's Gautama, the founder, entered the state of nirvana, or the state of non-being. So Buddha was never depicted in human form. But all of a sudden, about 125 A.D., Buddha starts showing up in human form. This is the earliest depiction of Buddha. That's Buddha. It doesn't look like the usual concept of Buddha here, but let's see, just a second. Okay. This is just an image of Jesus from one of the sarcophagi. So there's Buddha, and there's Jesus on the sarcophagus. And even grossly, you notice the marked similarity between these. This is another early depiction of Buddha. This is from India. This vessel was made, and this is supposedly Buddha here. But this is an image of Jesus from the Catacomba Comedilla in Rome. This is just the overlay on them, and you can see that these are practically the identical facial images here. This again, another one of the earliest depictions of Buddha. This again about 125 A.D. So this is Buddha all of a sudden started showing up in human form, and there was an abrupt change of Buddhist theology. There's since their ideal was nirvana, which is a state of non-being. They were never depicted. But all of a sudden, here Buddha starts showing up in human form, and the form is obviously greatly influenced by guess who? We do the overlay.
You're saying the people's one's off-center isn't called...
Yeah, let's see, just a second. Oh, okay, so we're doing the overlay here. You can actually see, here's this box with the Jewish phylactery in the forehead here. We can see the mustache, the beard down here. I'm sorry, what's that again?
You said the people, one of them was off-center?
Yeah, right. That's because actually the coin, those are the coins. They weren't put quite symmetrical on the eye. And many of the early artists thought they were looking at the open eyes here, rather than realizing they had the coin images. This is just the development of this frontality, this style in artwork here. I'm sorry, as you can see, we make posters. We video our work, we photograph it here, and we make posters. This is the city of Dura-Ropus, which was about 400 miles north of Israel, and was very close to the city of Edessa, where the Shroud had been, as the Mandelian had been sent in 30 A.D. So, this is the city, the outline of the city of Dura-Ropus. That was right on the Euphrates River here. It was a strong city, but it was about to be overrun by the Persians here, and so that they these are city walls here. That is the people were trying to keep the Persians from toppling their walls and getting into the city. So what they did is they piled dirt and debris up right inside the city walls here. Well, this happens to be a Jewish synagogue right here, and this is a Christian house church right down the street from them. But those got buried, when they were piling all the debris up to keep the walls from toppling. Well, the Persians overran the city anyway and destroyed everything in sight, but they didn't bother digging up the stuff that had been buried, which some researchers from Yale University did in 1932. And so they excavated the Jewish synagogue. This is the Jewish synagogue. Well, most people think Jews don't use images here. Well, here the Jewish synagogue is absolutely covered with magnificent frescoes here. These were painted about 240 A.D. This is Moses striking the water here. That's interestingly, here's the water flowing out. There are 12 houses here, and the individual is out of one of the houses. Well, you can guess what the symbolism there is. Those are the disciples, and one of the disciples got out of the house. But this is Moses on the Roman or in the Doropa synagogue. Here's Jesus in the Catacomb of Calixtus. Here's Mordecai on the synagogue. Here's Jesus on the sarcophagus. Here is Moses again. Here's Jesus over here.